There is a moment that every empath experiences, and almost none of them know what to do with it. It happens when you are in a conversation with someone. Could be a friend, could be a colleague, could be someone you have known for years or someone you met 20 minutes ago, and something shifts. Not in them, not in what they are saying. Something in you, a feeling, arrives. Specific, clear, uninvited, and it is telling you something about this person that they have not told you, something they may not even be fully aware of themselves. And you have two choices in that moment. You can follow the feeling, trust it, let it inform how you respond, how you hold the conversation, what you offer and what you withhold, or you can dismiss it. Tell yourself you are projecting. Tell yourself you are being oversensitive. Tell yourself that what you felt was not real because you cannot explain where it came from. Most empaths choose the second option, not because the feeling was wrong, because they were never taught what to do with it, because nobody ever told them that. What they felt in that moment was not a flaw to be corrected, but a signal to be read. The empaths who figure this out, the ones who learn to work with what they feel, rather than against it, become something genuinely different from the rest. Not more sensitive. They were always sensitive enough. Something more precise than that. Something more skilled. Something that other people notice without being able to name. Today, we are going to name it. There are specific things that psychologically sophisticated empaths do. Things that most empaths never learn. Things that separate the ones who are consumed by their sensitivity from the ones who have learned to use it, and we are going through all of them in detail, with the psychological framework underneath each one, so that what you take away from today is not just recognition, but understanding, because recognition without understanding is just a feeling, and you have had enough feelings without context. Today you are getting the context. Stay with me. This is going to go somewhere worth going. Let us start with the thing that separates every genuinely skilled empath from every well-meaning but struggling one. The thing that, once you understand it, reframes almost everything about how you have been experiencing your own sensitivity. The struggling empath believes their feelings are about whoever is in front of them. The skilled empath knows their feelings are information that requires verification before action. This distinction sounds simple. It is not simple. It is one of the most psychologically demanding things a highly sensitive person can learn to do, because the feelings arrive with such immediacy, such force, such apparent clarity that treating them as information rather than fact requires a quality of internal discipline that goes against every instinct the empath has developed. Here is what Chase Hughes has observed consistently. In working with highly sensitive people, the empath who has not learned this distinction is constantly at the mercy of their own perceptions. They feel something about a person and they respond to the feeling as though it were confirmed reality. They absorb someone's anxiety and they assume the situation is genuinely dangerous. They sense tension in a room and they immediately begin managing it, smoothing it, taking responsibility for resolving it, without ever pausing to ask whether the tension requires their intervention at all. This pattern, feeling, then responding as though the feeling were fact, is the engine of empath exhaustion. It is why highly sensitive people end up carrying so much that does not belong to them, because they never developed the habit of pausing between the signal and the response, of treating the feeling as the beginning of an inquiry rather than the end of one. The smart empath does something different. When the feeling arrives, and it always arrives, sharp and specific and completely uninvited, They do not immediately act on it. They note it. They acknowledge it with the same quality of attention they would give to any important piece of incoming information. And then they ask a question. Whose is this? 3 words. Whose is this? Is this feeling originating in my own experience right now, or am I absorbing it from the environment, from the person in front of me, from the emotional residue of everything I have been carrying today? This question sounds straightforward. For an empath, it is genuinely difficult, because the absorption happens so automatically, so completely, so below the threshold of conscious awareness, that by the time the feeling surfaces, it has already been integrated into the empath's own experience. It already feels like theirs. It already has the texture and the weight and the immediate of a personal emotion rather than an absorbed one. Learning to ask whose is this, and to actually sit with the question long enough to get a real answer, is the foundational skill of the psychologically sophisticated empath. Everything else we are going to discuss today builds on this, because without the ability to distinguish your own emotional experience from what you are absorbing from others, every other skill is operating on compromised data. So you start here. Every time feeling arrives, you note it. You ask whose is this, and you wait for an honest answer before you decide what to do. This waiting, this deliberate pause between signal and response, is not the suppression of sensitivity. It is the development of something more sophisticated than raw sensitivity. It is the development of emotional precision, the ability to feel everything you feel and also know what you are feeling and where it is coming from. That precision is what the struggling empath is missing, and it is the first thing the smart empath builds. Now let us talk about something that most content about empaths gets completely wrong, and getting it wrong keeps empaths stuck in a pattern that costs them enormously. The conventional narrative about empaths and boundaries goes something like this. Empaths are bad at boundaries. Empaths need to learn to say no. Empaths need to protect their energy by keeping people at a distance. This narrative is not wrong exactly, but it is incomplete in a way that makes it practically useless for most empaths who try to apply it. Here is why. The advice to set better boundaries treats boundary setting as a behavioral problem, as something you do differently in your actions and your words. And so empaths learn to say no more often. They learn to end conversations earlier. They learn the language of limits and they try to apply it, and it does not work. Not fully. Not sustainably. Because the boundary was placed at the wrong level. The smart empath understands something that most boundary advice misses entirely. The boundary that actually matters for a highly sensitive person is not behavioral. It is perceptual. It is not about what you say or do in relation to other people. It is about what you allow to move from the external environment into your internal experience. Chase Hughes describes this as the difference between a fence and a filter. A fence keeps things out entirely. A filter lets things through selectively, based on criteria you have deliberately chosen. Most boundary advice teaches empaths to build fences, keep people out, limit exposure, reduce contact, and while there are situations where this is appropriate, where certain people or environments are genuinely harmful, and distance is the right response for the most part, fences do not work for empath, because the empath's sensitivity does not stop at a fence. The absorption happens before the fence can engage. The feeling arrives from across the room, from the tone of a voice message, from the energy of an environment, Before any behavioral boundary has a chance to operate, the filter is different. The filter operates at the level of perception itself. It is the practiced ability to let information in, to receive the signal fully, with the complete sensitivity that is natural to the empath, while simultaneously maintaining a separation between the information and the self, between what is being absorbed and who is doing the absorbing. This is not detachment. Detachment would require the empath to dampen their sensitivity, to turn down the volume of the signal, to feel less. That is not what the filter does. The filter does not change what comes in. It changes what you do with it once it arrives. The information enters. You feel it completely, and you remain, throughout that feeling, aware that you are the one feeling it, that you are not the feeling, that the feeling is moving through you rather than becoming. You dot this distinction between feeling something completely and being that feeling is the psychological foundation of every boundary that actually works for an empath. And it is infinitely more powerful than any behavioral strategy because it operates at the source rather than at the downstream consequence. How do you build a filter rather than a fence? It starts with the question we discussed earlier. Whose is this? But it extends beyond that into a practice of maintaining what psychologists call dual awareness, the simultaneous experience of the feeling and the observation of the feeling, being in it and watching yourself be in it at the same time. This is not a natural state. It requires deliberate cultivation. It is built through repeated practice in low-stakes situations before it becomes available in high-stakes ones. But once it is built, once the empath has developed a genuine capacity for dual awareness in their emotional experience, it changes the entire texture of how they move through the world. They can be fully present with someone in pain without taking that pain into themselves permanently. They can feel the emotional temperature of a difficult situation without being destabilized by it. They can absorb information about what someone is feeling without losing track of the fact that it is information rather than identity. This is the filter. And building it is the second thing that psychologically sophisticated empaths do differently. Let us talk about energy, because this is where the practical consequences of everything we have discussed become most visible in the empath's daily life. Every empath who has not done the work we are describing operates on a chronic energy deficit. They wake up already partially depleted. They move through their day, absorbing from every interaction, every environment, every piece of content they encounter. They end their days significantly more depleted than they began it, and they sleep, if they sleep well, which many empaths do not, and they wake up tomorrow, partially recovered, but rarely fully restored. This cycle, repeated over months and years, produces a specific kind of exhaustion that is difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced it. Not tiredness exactly, something more fundamental, a depletion of the resource that makes everything else possible, the capacity to feel, to connect, to create, to pursue, to maintain the quality of presence that is the empath's greatest gift. The smart empath treats their energy the way a skilled financial manager treats capital, not as something to be spent freely on whatever presents itself, but as a resource to be allocated deliberately, protected consistently, and invested in ways that generate return rather than simply drain. What does this look like practically? It starts with an honest audit. Most empaths have never actually examined where their energy goes. They know they are depleted. They do not know the specific sources of the depletion or their relative scale. The smart empath does this examination. They look, with genuine honesty at the full landscape of their energy expenditure. The relationships, the environments, the media consumption, the internal patterns, the rumination, the replaying of difficult interactions, the anticipatory anxiety about future ones, the invisible labor of managing their own absorbed emotional content throughout the day. And once they can see the full picture, they begin making different choices. Not dramatic choices necessarily, not the wholesale elimination of relationships or the radical restructuring of their life. Small, deliberate, consistent choices about where the energy goes, which conversations they enter fully and which they maintain a degree of separation in, which environments they protect themselves from and which they move through with the filter engaged, which internal patterns they interrupt and which they allow. The cumulative effect of these small choices, made consistently over time, is profound, because the empath's energy is not actually limited in the way it appears when it is being drained without management. The baseline capacity is large, larger often than the empath realizes, because they have never experienced what it feels like to have that capacity operating with anything approaching efficiency. When the drain is managed, and the filter is in place and the allocation is deliberate, the empath discovers something that changes how they understand themselves. They are not constitutionally exhausted. They have been constitutionally generous with a resource they did not know they were giving away. That discovery and the reorientation it produces is one of the most significant things that happens in the development of a psychologically sophisticated empath. Now, halfway through, and I want to pause on something that I think deserves more space than it usually gets in conversations about empath psychology. The question of what empaths are actually for, not in a prescriptive sense, not what they should do or be, but what the sensitivity, this extraordinary, costly, sometimes overwhelming capacity for feeling the world at depth, is actually designed to produce. What it makes possible that would not be possible without it. Because here is the thing. The conversation about empaths in popular culture is almost entirely focused on the cost, the exhaustion, the overwhelm, the difficulty of navigating a world that is not designed for this level of sensitivity. And that cost is real and it deserves to be acknowledged. But the cost is not the whole story. The cost is the price of something, and what it buys, what the sensitivity actually makes possible for the empath who has learned to work with it rather than be consumed by it, is something the world is genuinely, urgently hungry for. Genuine presence. The real thing, not the performed version, not the trained professional warmth that therapists and coaches and customer service representatives learn to produce. The actual experience of being with someone who feels what you feel, who receives your reality not as information to be processed and responded to appropriately, but as experience to be genuinely shared. Most people have never had this, not fully, not from another person who was not also an empath, because most people's nervous systems do not work this way. They cannot feel what you feel in the way an empath can. They can understand it. They can empathize with it in the cognitive sense. They can respond to it appropriately, but they cannot feel it with you. Not like this. The empath who has done the work, who has built the filter and developed the dual awareness and learned to allocate their energy deliberately, can offer this fully, completely, without being destroyed by it, without the offering coming at the cost of themselves. And when they offer it, when the genuine, complete, receiving presence of a skilled empath is brought to bear on another person's experience, Something happens that is difficult to describe and impossible to fake. The other person feels known. Not understood exactly. Known at a level that most human interactions never reach. At a level that changes people. That moves things in them that have been stuck for a long time. That produces the particular relief of finally, completely being seen. This is what the sensitivity is for. This is what all of it, the exhaustion and the grief and the difficulty and the cost has been building toward in the empath who chooses to develop it rather than simply endure it. The ability to make another human being feel genuinely known in a world of chronic surface connection, of performative empathy, of digital relationships that simulate intimacy while delivering none of it. This capacity is one of the rarest and most needed things that exists, and it belongs to the empath who does the work. Let us talk about one more thing that smart empaths do that most empaths never figure out, because it is the one that produces the most visible change in how their lives actually function. They stop trying to fix what they feel. This sounds backwards. It sounds like advice to give up or to stop caring. It is neither of those things. Here is what it actually means. The default pattern for most empaths when they absorb a difficult feeling, whether their own or someone else's, is to immediately engage their problem-solving capacity, to try to understand where the feeling came from, what it means, what needs to happen for it to resolve, to manage it, process it, work through it, arrive at clarity and resolution and the comfortable sense that something has been handled. This pattern is not wrong. Understanding feelings matters. Processing experiences matters. But for the empath, who absorbs at such scale and such depth, this pattern becomes its own drain. Because there is always more to process. Always another layer. Always another absorbed experience that requires understanding and integration and resolution. The processing never ends. Because the absorption never ends. The smart empath learns something that sits at the center of almost every sophisticated, psychological and contemplative tradition. That feelings do not need to be fixed. They need to be felt, completely, without the addition of the management layer, without the immediate reaching for understanding and resolution. Just felt, fully, and then released. Not suppressed. Not avoided. Not analyzed into submission. Simply experienced completely and then allowed to complete their natural movement through the nervous system without interference. This is physiologically sound. Emotions are neurological events. They have a natural arc, arrival, peak, decline, resolution that completes itself in a matter of minutes when it is not interrupted. The interruption that prevents completion is almost always the thinking mind arriving to manage the feeling before it has had time to run its course. The empath who learns to feel without fixing, to stay with the full intensity of what arrives without immediately reaching for understanding or resolution, discovers something surprising. The feelings move faster. They complete more quickly. They leave less residue. The processing that used to take hours or days of effortful engagement happens in minutes of simply feeling, and the energy that was going into the management layer into the constant effortful processing of absorbed emotional content becomes available for other things. This is not a small shift. For an empath who has spent years in the exhausting loop of absorb and manage, the discovery that feelings can simply be felt and released without the management layer is genuinely transformative. It changes the relationship with sensitivity itself. from something to be survived to something that moves through you, that uses you as a medium for its own completion and then continues on its way, leaving you cleaner rather than more depleted. The empath, who has developed this, who can feel fully and release cleanly and maintain the energy that the management layer was consuming, is operating at a level of psychological sophistication that most people, empath or not, never reach. They are not more sensitive than they were. They are more skilled than they were. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a gift that costs everything and a gift that costs you only what it is worth. You have always been sensitive enough. You have always had the capacity. You have always had everything that the skilled empath has in terms of raw material. What the smart empath has that the struggling empath does not is not more feeling. It is more skill, more precision, more understanding of the mechanism, more deliberate relationship with what the sensitivity actually is and what it is actually for. And skill is not something you were born with or without. It is something you build deliberately through understanding and practice and the willingness to examine your own patterns with the same depth of attention you have always given to everyone else's. That last part is the most important. The empath who turns the sensitivity inward, who applies the same quality of attentive, receptive, non-judgmental presence to their own experience that they have always offered to others, discovers things about themselves that change everything, because they have always been extraordinarily good at receiving, at being present with experience, at holding complexity without needing to resolve it prematurely. They just never aimed that capacity at themselves. The smart empath does, and what they find when they do is not what they expected. They do not find damage. They do not find the fundamental flaw they have always half suspected was at the center of all this difficulty. They find someone who has been carrying an enormous amount with an extraordinary degree of grace and very little acknowledgement. Someone whose sensitivity has been functioning as a resource for everyone around them and rarely for themselves. Someone who is underneath all the exhaustion and the confusion and the accumulated weight of absorbed experience, fundamentally intact, fundamentally capable, fundamentally worthy of the same quality of presence that they have been giving the world for as long as they can remember. That discovery, that recognition of your own fundamental wholeness, arrived at through the turning of your own sensitivity toward yourself, is perhaps the most important thing a genuine empath can experience. It does not solve everything. It does not remove the challenges of being highly sensitive in a world that was not designed with you in mind. It does not make the absorption stop, or the exhaustion disappear, or the difficult feelings arrive any less frequently. But it changes the relationship to all of those things. From someone things happen to someone who is developing the skill to work with what they are. From someone defined by the cost of their sensitivity to someone building mastery of their gift. That is what the smart empath is doing every day, in the small, deliberate, largely invisible choices about where their attention goes and what they allow in and how they respond to what arrives. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but consistently, and with a growing understanding that the sensitivity they have spent so long trying to manage is not something to be overcome. It is something to be developed, and you are already developing it. The fact that you are here, that you stayed for this conversation, that something in what we covered today landed as recognition rather than information, means the development is already happening. You are not at the beginning of this. You are somewhere in the middle, and the middle, uncomfortable as it sometimes feels, is where everything important gets built. Keep building. And if today gave you something worth keeping, share it with someone who is still trying to figure out why they feel so much and what they are supposed to do with it. Because that person needs to know that the sensitivity is not the problem. It never was.